Please be aware, in this podcast series we talk about all areas of safeguarding, which some people may find upsetting. So please make sure you're okay listening to today's topic. Be mindful of those around you, such as children, that you might not want to listen in. Hi, I'm SSS Safeguarding Director Sam Preston.
And I'm former head teacher and content author Sara Spinks.
Hello everyone. Today we're talking about the new government publication, Keeping Children Safe, Helping Families Thrive. So let's start with the big picture, Sam. The government's model aims to reduce the soaring social care bill while improving the outcomes for children. What is driving these reforms and why now?
So this document sets out the proposals for, as you said, reforming children's social care, or some of them. So the government is responding really to a system that is, it's stretched to its limits. And over the past decade, we've seen, a 4.4 billion increase in spending on children's social care. But much of that has gone towards statutory and acute services. So preventative measures, they've been woefully underfunded. And that's led to more children entering care. So the new proposed model is an attempt to shift back that focus to prevention and community-based support through a series of legislative changes.
That sounds really ambitious, but do you think this balance can be achieved without compromising care, for those already in the system?
Yeah, well, that's the £1 million question, isn't it, Sarah? While the principles are in the main sound, their success will depend on proper investment, workforce capacity, and robust monitoring to ensure that no child falls through the cracks. But if I dare say, I don't think it's ambitious enough, which over the course of this and our next podcast will become evident.
Ooh. So, I suppose the first principle, keeping families together, is this is about keeping children with their families wherever possible. So, I suppose this includes family group decision making. Can you sort of explain how this works and why it's a cornerstone of the reforms?
Yeah, well, family group decision making, it's often just referred to as FGDM, that empowers the extended family to develop their own plans to keep children safe and cared for. So it's particularly effective because it draws on family strengths and community resources. And research has shown that it can reduce care proceedings and the number of children entering care.
Well, that sounds promising. But what about cases where that immediate intervention is required? Could this process delay those sort of urgent decisions?
Well, that's a really valid concern. And I think it's something, we're really going to have to watch out for. Safeguards will need to be in place to ensure that family group decision making is used appropriately. And in cases of imminent risk, the process must be bypassed to prioritise the child's safety.
Yeah, definitely. So the second principle, kinship care and fostering, prioritises kinship care and fostering over residential placements. Why do you think this shift is so important?
Well, children tend to fare better in family-based environments. And listeners may wish to access our, as you know, Sarah, we've done a podcast on kinship care, and we have got articles on our website. You can find both the podcast and the articles if you've not accessed them before about kinship care. They're on our website. So kinship care is where relatives effectively step in. And that can provide continuity of relationships and culture for children at a time when their existing life is somewhat chaotic. Fostering, that offers a stable, nurturing alternative. In the main, it's designed as a stepping stone, either back to family care or to finding permanent care outside the immediate family. So both are less disruptive than residential care and often more cost effective, certainly more cost effective. But we have to remember we're talking about children who may have experienced trauma. And although intervention is being taken to keep them safe, that intervention will be in itself traumatic.
Yeah. But isn't the success of this model dependent on having enough willing and capable carers? What's been done to sort of address the shortfall?
And you heard me giggle there. Yeah, absolutely. Recruitment and retention is going to be critical. The government plans to increase support for foster and kinship carers, but this will require significant investment in training, financial incentives, and emotional support for carers. Kinship care, that also relies, I have to say this, on suitable placement within the extended family unit. And I am stressing the word suitable. We need to be careful on two accounts, having strict criteria for the provision of kinship care. And I've been in situations where children have been placed with extended family where the situation really wasn't, to say the least, ideal. And we mustn't, for want of a better phrase, set children up for future repeated trauma.
So just explain that a little bit more. What do you mean by that, Sam?
Well, as an example, I can cite a case, anonymise a case where a child lost both parents to substance misuse. And the child initially experienced foster care, because their only grandparent felt that they were too old to care for the child. So a package of support was designed to support the grandparent, and the child went to live with them, which in itself was an adaptation that the child and the grandparent had to go through. But, there was some sense of stability. Within 12 months, the grandparent sadly died. Now, children are remarkably resilient. But I do worry that to make the model of kinship care work, there needs to be, a really sound structure to cope with when, as I've just given an example, when things change.
Oh, absolutely. Definitely. Yeah. Let's think about that third principle now, fixing the care market. So excessive profits by private providers have been a long-standing issue. It was even on our local news, actually, last night. Yeah. How do these reforms aim to tackle that?
Well, the government is looking to introduce cost transparency and potentially cap profits if profiteering continues. And they're also encouraging non-profit providers to re-enter the market, which could help rebalance the system.
But could tighter regulations lead to providers leaving the market altogether, reducing that placement availability, if they're all priced out?
Yeah, well, that's the risk, isn't it? And if providers withdraw, local authorities will struggle to meet the demand. I mean, they're already struggling to meet the demand. They struggle to meet the demand to place children within their own local authority area.
Yeah.
It's really not an ideal situation. So the challenge will be ensuring regulations promote both ethical practices without discouraging investment in high quality care.
Absolutely. And it's very much in the news at the moment, Sam, because there's councils at this time of year, we're now at the beginning of December, councils are setting their budgets and are already having to really think about increasing council tax funding to fund a large proportion of this is to fund social care.
Yeah.
I suppose the fourth principle focuses on investment in enablers, like the workforce and data systems. So one proposal is the introduction of a single unique identifier, an SUI. And I think that means that all children will have a single unique number or code, which would be used across all services, sort of in a similar way to how a UPN currently works within education. How would this change things, and what do you think the challenges with that would be?
Well, the SUI would streamline data sharing across agencies, ensuring that professionals have access to consistent and up-to-date information about the child. If essentially, they're tracking a child by one number, so they're not going to have an education UPN, they're not going to have a separate NHS number, so it's going to do away with all of that. And that might particularly help cross-border, because obviously at the moment there are issues, particularly within health, about that. So in theory, it could reduce delays and improve decision-making because they would have better access to records. However, it would mean a massive spend on ensuring digital systems talk to each other. And we know that that comes at a huge financial cost. We're not just surmising it will, we know it will. The last Labour government started this programme, which was actually shelved by the Cameron government due to the complexity and cost. And that was all about getting all the different services and the systems used to be able to communicate with each other. So to give some perspective, let's just take health. Within the UK, these are the things you're going to have to cope with. We've got devolved health services, which currently don't share the systems. So you've got the NHS in Scotland, you've got Wales, they're all not one system, and not all of them are compatible. Then you've got GP practices who, whilst they use some NHS systems, they also commission their own MIS solutions. So we're relying more on pharmacies. So it's about the complexity. That's a major undertaking just to get all of these systems talking to each other. And that's just health. That's just one partner.
Yeah.
So I think it would be naive to assume that the introduction of a single identifier is going to be the answer to this. There's so much more that will need to be in place.
Yeah, and I think also, data sharing is a really sensitive issue at play here as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
How do we ensure that this doesn't infringe on privacy?
Yeah, it's about finding the right balance, clear guidelines on who can access the data and for what purpose, combined with robust cybersecurity measures. That's going to be essential.
Absolutely. Let's now sort of look at the wider challenges. These reforms go beyond social care, addressing issues like poverty, serious youth violence. How does this broader approach, you think, fit into the model?
Well, what's outlined in the proposals and the changes in legislation, it recognises that safeguarding is linked to wider societal factors. Tackling poverty, for example, reduces the stressors that often lead to family breakdowns. And similarly, addressing youth violence, gang culture and domestic abuse, that creates safer environments for children to thrive. So all these safeguarding issues link and they impact on social care. So I worry, though, that whilst acknowledging this in the document, in the proposals, there really isn't anything within this document that goes beyond that.
Absolutely. It's a huge undertaking.
Yeah.
Why do you think this cross-government approach is realistic? Or do you think it's realistic, should I say?
Well, it's ambitious, maybe a little halcyon in intent. In fact, I felt it read a little, the older listeners will get this reference. I felt it read like a bit of an Enid Blyton book, There's an awful lot that they really are going to have to unpick to make this work. And the one thing I will say is there was a statement in the document that made reference to the fact that if less children are going into social care, which is very, very costly, there would be savings to be made. I can tell you now, there will be no savings to be made in this model. Absolutely none. I think we're probably going to talk a little bit about that later in the other podcast. But success will depend on how well departments work together and whether adequate resources are allocated to these interconnected challenges.
Absolutely. So I think as we wrap up, Sam, what do you think will be the biggest challenges in implementing these reforms?
Well, in addition to everything else I've said, the biggest thing for me, funding. That's going to be the first hurdle. Without sustained investment, these reforms risk being another ambitious plan that doesn't translate into reality. And that's worrying because we're talking about vulnerable children here. So that's a huge injury. So funding, that's major. Workforce capacity, that's got to be the next issue. And that's not even alluded to in this document. Social care staff are already stretched thin. We're having difficulties recruiting and retaining. We've got difficulties retaining within education, within teaching profession. So that's another thing that we've got to address. And you can't address that quickly. You can't create social workers quickly. You can't create teachers quickly. They've got to train. So there's no fast tracking here, really, in effect, not to get experienced those that are going to become, and then it's the retention thing, isn't it? because it's that experience that makes the difference. And then lastly, I suppose for me, it's about monitoring and adapting, having that flexibility to adapt the system as these challenges evolve. Because we see that all too often. Something's introduced, we'll let it run, and then something happens and we go, oh, I think if they're going to go down this model, and particularly a model that is so focused on fostering and kinship care, this system's really going to have that flexibility to adapt to the need, because it's not going to be simple.
No. And I suppose let's focus on if it is done right. What do you think that sort of potential impact could be?
Well, assuming you got round all those hurdles and you kept all these things on your radar.
You're living in a blank world, yeah.
Yeah. If implemented effectively, there's no doubt, these reforms could transform children's social care. It will reduce the number of children entering the care system, and it will improve the outcomes for those who do, because the other bit of this is it's not just about less children going into the care system. It's about improving the care system that those children are offered. There will always be children who will enter the care system. So there's an awful lot in this document about the prevention of children going into the care system. There's not the same level of weight being placed on how do we rebuild the current care system to give those children that will enter that system better outcomes. So if we're going ahead with this model, it's a chance to build a system that truly puts children and their families at its heart.
That sounds great. Thanks, Sam.